In 1934, a man in Akron, Ohio, came home from a foundry that had cut his hours to 3 days a week. He found the kitchen faucet dripping, the back door dragging on its frame, and a chair come loose at the joint where his oldest boy sat. He fixed all three before supper: a strip of leather cut from a worn belt, a cedar shim split off a packing crate, and a matchstick dipped in glue. 19 minutes. He did not look anything up. There was no one to call and no money to pay them if there had been. He ate at 6, and not one of those three problems ever came back. The man who owns that same house today paid a plumber $170 for the faucet alone. He did not think of himself as handy. He thought of himself as a man who handled what broke, because in 1934, walking away from a broken thing was not a choice a working family could afford. Use it up. Wear it out. Make do or do without. That was not a slogan printed on a poster. That was Tuesday. And the knowledge that made it possible was not rare or specialized. Every father on every block carried it and passed it down without ceremony. That knowledge is not lost. It is sitting in a toolbox in your garage that has not been opened in 20 years. Number 16 silences a hinge that has been screaming for 2 years using something already sitting under your bathroom sink. Number 9 stops a crack from splitting a foundation for less than the cost of a sandwich. And number 3, the fix every Depression-era father did before the evening radio came on, now runs $400 to $800. That is the price of paying a man to do it for you. These 20 repairs were never about saving money. They were about never needing to be saved. A man who could mend his own home answered to no one's invoice. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 20 forgotten home repairs every American dad knew during the Great Depression, the ones that could still save you thousands today. Number 20, silencing a squeaky floor with powdered graphite. You found the board that creaked under your weight. You worked powdered graphite or plain talcum down into the seam with a stiff playing card until it packed the gap and the squeak died. No tools, no tearing up the floor. In 1933, with a baby asleep in a crowded house and walls thin as paper, a board that screamed at midnight was a genuine household problem. The powder was already on the shelf. The old-timers worked it in dry, never wet, because moisture would only swell the wood and bring the squeak right back in a week. Pennies, 3 minutes. A squeak is not a structural failure. It is 2 dry boards rubbing and a gap that needs filling. Number 19, shimming a door that drags on the floor. You slid a thin cedar shim under the hinge side corner and tightened every screw in both hinges. If a screw hole had stripped loose and would not bite, you packed it with a glue-dipped matchstick, let it set hard, and drove the screw again into solid wood. In a house with 4 children and 1 door to the yard, a dragging door was a daily aggravation that wore on everyone. 5 minutes and a screwdriver set it right. The door did not need a new frame or a new door. It needed a man who noticed it before it got worse. Number 18, patching plaster with newspaper and joint compound. You dampened the broken hole in the wall. You pressed torn strips of newspaper into it in overlapping layers. You let each one dry before laying the next. Then you finished it smooth with joint compound, drawn flat with a wet knife. An old plasterer called it the poor man's lath. Layered properly, the paper gave the same mechanical key that wood strips gave, for a fraction of a cent. In the 30s, old newspaper was the one material every house had to spare, stacked by the stove for kindling and never thrown out. A man tore it with the grain so the strips lay flat and would not bubble under the compound. The newspaper was not a shortcut. It was the structural answer. Number 17. Stopping a running toilet by bending the float arm. You lifted the tank lid and bent the metal float arm gently downward with both hands until the water shut off at the proper level. No parts, no service call. In 1935, a tank that ran all night was a float set too high, and any man who had looked inside one even once knew the correction in under 10 seconds. The constant trickle was water you were paying for and pouring straight down the drain. A careful man bent the arm a hair at a time and watched the float, because too far the other way and the bowl would not fill. He did not fix the toilet. He bent a wire and went back to his coffee. Number 16. Silencing a squeaky hinge with petroleum jelly. You tapped the hinge pin up out of the knuckle. You coated it with petroleum jelly from the tube under the bathroom sink and tapped it back down into place. Gone, completely. Every man then understood that dry metal grinding on dry metal makes the noise, and that any thin grease ends it for good. What separated a quiet house from a loud one was not skill. It was simply the willingness to lift one pin. That hinge did not need a handyman with a truck. It needed a knowing hand. Number 15. Fixing a dripping faucet with a leather washer. You shut the supply valve under the sink. You pulled the stem, cut a clean disc from an old leather belt the same diameter as the valve seat, and pressed it in where the worn rubber washer had failed. The drip stopped cold. In 1932, no family watching its water bill would let a faucet run for weeks. The leather cost absolutely nothing, scavenged from a belt too cracked to wear. A careful man soaked the disc in a little oil first, so it would seat soft against the brass and never crack the way a dry one would. 4 minutes. Not a plumbing job. A flat refusal to waste what you were paying for. Number 14. Straightening bent nails on a flat iron. You held the bent nail against the back of a vise or a flat iron. You tapped it in light passes. You rotated it a quarter turn between strokes until it ran perfectly true. A Depression carpenter kept a coffee can of bent nails on his bench and straightened them in batches on a Sunday evening. A fresh keg of nails was money most men simply did not have to spend. The bent nail had not finished its working life. It was not trash. It was a resource that had not yet finished its work. In 2023, the home repair and remodeling industry in the United States generated over $600 billion. In 1933, the average American household spent close to nothing on professional home repair, not because nothing broke in those houses, because the man inside fixed it himself. A recent survey found fewer than 1 in 5 homeowners feel confident making even a basic plumbing repair. During the Depression, that number ran the opposite direction. Most men would have been quietly ashamed not to know. The knowledge did not vanish on its own. An economy was built, 1 decade at a time, on replacing it with a service call. They did not have to burn the books or hide the tools. They only had to convince you, slowly, that your own hands were not qualified to touch your own house. Your grandfather's hands were worth more than any maintenance plan ever printed. That is exactly why no one ever sat you down and taught you what he knew without thinking. Number 13. Fixing a wobbly chair with a matchstick and glue. You pulled the loose joint apart. You pressed a glue-coated matchstick into the dowel hole, snug against the worn tenon. Then you clamped it with a rope loop, twisted tight with a stick. The matchstick filled the gap that years of daily use had worn into the soft wood. For a family taking every single meal around one table, a wobbly chair was a small but real point of pride. A new set was out of the question on foundry wages. He did not buy a chair he could not afford. He refused to let this one fail. Number 12. Reglazing a broken window pane with linseed putty. You cleared the broken shards. You brushed linseed oil onto the bare wood of the frame. You pressed glazing putty in with your thumb. Then you drew the bevel clean to 45 degrees in one steady, unbroken pass. A glazier charged real money to set a single pane in 1934. The putty cost a few cents from the hardware store. A man who kept a can of it on the shelf set his own glass and never called anyone. The pane was replaceable. The hands that set it were not. Number 11. Waterproofing work boots with beeswax. You warmed the leather near the wood stove, worked solid beeswax into every seam and stitch with your fingertips until the leather would take no more, and buffed it down smooth. For a working man whose one good pair of boots had to survive 3 hard winters, a sealed seam was the line between dry feet and months of cold misery. A new pair was a week's wages he did not have, and wet feet on a job site meant sickness he could not afford either. One treatment done at the kitchen table after supper. No bill. The boot did not need replacing. It needed a man who tended it before it failed. Number 10. Rehanging a sagging gate with wire and a turnbuckle. You ran a diagonal wire from the high latch corner down to the low hinge corner. You threaded it through a turnbuckle. You tightened it until the gate pulled itself square again. A sagging gate is a simple diagonal force problem. A diagonal wire answers it directly. A few cents of hardware, 40 minutes in the yard. He did not tear out the gate and build another. He understood exactly why it sagged, and he countered it. Number 9. Patching a concrete crack with hydraulic cement. You chiseled the crack out wider at its base than at its mouth, so the patch would lock itself in place and never push back out. You mixed hydraulic cement to a stiff paste, pressed it hard into the crack, and held firm pressure for 3 minutes while it set. Hydraulic cement hardens under moisture instead of being ruined by it. It seizes inside the crack itself. You mixed only what you could press in within 3 minutes, because once it began to set, there was no working it again. A lesson every man learned exactly once. Materials ran under a dime. The wall was not failing. It had a crack. Those are 2 different problems. Number 8. Freeing a sticky window with a paraffin candle. You ran a plain white paraffin candle firmly up and down both channels of the sash until the wax seated itself into the wood grain. The window slid smooth and quiet. Wood swells with summer damp and binds tight in the channel, and that swelling is the entire problem. Paraffin ends the friction in 30 seconds at no real cost. Every household kept candles for the nights the power failed. The window was not broken. It was dry and swollen. Those are different problems. Number 7. Sealing a pipe joint with hemp fiber and pipe dope. You wire brushed the male threads down to clean metal. You wound hemp fiber clockwise around them in tight, overlapping passes. You brushed pipe dope over the fiber. Then you threaded the fitting home hard. The joint did not weep a drop. Hemp fiber and compound remain among the most reliable thread sealants ever put to use. Joints made this way in the 30s still outlast modern press fittings by decades. He sealed it once with materials that cost almost nothing and never thought about it again. There is a man in Harlan County, Kentucky, who is 81 years old. He can reseat a valve, repoint a brick wall, patch a plaster ceiling. and name exactly what is wrong with a furnace by the sound it makes from the next room over. He learned it standing beside his father, who learned it standing beside his, a man who came up hungry in the Depression and threw away nothing that could still be made to work. No one has asked him to teach any of it. His own grandchildren call contractors. When he is gone, the instinct goes with him, not the information. That much lives in books on a shelf. The confidence. The thing that looks at a broken object and reaches for a solution before it reaches for a phone. That cannot be handed down in a weekend class or a video. It can only be rebuilt in one man at a time, and only by starting. Number 6, sharpening a handsaw with a triangular file. You clamped the saw flat in a vise and filed every third tooth with 6 steady strokes, then turned the blade around and filed the alternating set the same way. A sharp saw cuts straight and clean and does not bind in the cut. A dull one wanders off the line, splits the board, and slowly wears out the man pushing it. Keeping the edge keen was simply part of owning the tool at all. The old-timers kept every tooth the same height, because one tall tooth would grab and pull the cut-off line. He did not blame the saw when it quit cutting. He sat down and sharpened it. Number 5, repacking a leaking valve stem with graphite string. You shut the main. You backed off the packing nut on the valve. You wound 3 tight wraps of graphite string clockwise around the stem. Then you snugged the nut back down over it. The drip at the handle stopped. A weeping valve stem is almost never a failed valve at all. The old packing has simply dried out over the years and shrunk away from the stem. New graphite string cost a few cents on the spool. He did not replace the whole valve. He replaced the string around it and walked away. Number 4, tuck pointing failing mortar in a brick wall. You raked the crumbling mortar out of the joints 3/4 of an inch deep. You dampened the surrounding brick. You pressed fresh mortar in with a tuck pointer. You struck it to a clean concave line. Failing mortar lets water seep in behind the brick face. In winter, that trapped water freezes, expands, and spalls the face clean off the brick for good. A man with a pointer and an afternoon stopped that cold. The brick itself was sound. The mortar between it was not. He fixed the mortar. Consider what the trades charge now for the work in the back half of this list. A plumber bills $150 an hour, and the national average for a simple faucet or valve repair runs $300 and up. The parts inside cost between $1 and $5. A mason quotes you 4 figures to repoint a wall that a Depression-era man with a pointer fixed across one Saturday morning. You are not paying for materials. The materials are pennies. You are not even paying for real skill because you just watched how simple the work actually is. You are paying for the long, quiet decades in which we were told, over and over, that touching our own homes was too complicated for ordinary hands. It was never too complicated. It was only made to feel that way. Not a repair bill, a bill for permission to call someone. Number 3, rehanging a sagging door with one longer screw. You drove a single 3-inch wood screw through the top hole of the upper hinge until it bit past the jamb and sank deep into the solid stud framed behind it. The whole door lifted square. The latch lined up with the strike on the first try. A sagging door is almost never a structural problem with the frame. It is one stripped screw hole that has carried the full weight of the door for 30 years. The old-timers reached for a screw long enough to pass the soft jamb entirely and bite the framing stud behind it. The door did not need planing or rehanging. It needed one longer screw. Number 2, weather stripping a drafty door with felt strip. You cut felt strip to length. You pressed it firmly along the doorstop on all 3 sides of the frame. You closed the door against it until the seal ran complete, with no gap left anywhere. In a cold house heated by a single coal stove, every gap around that door was money walking straight back out into the snow. A few cents of felt from the hardware store closed it for the whole winter. The old-timers found the gaps first by running a lit candle slow around the frame on a windy night and watching where the flame leaned. In the Depression, heat you had paid for and then lost was heat you could not afford to lose. The cold came through the gap. The felt closed the gap. Number 1, looking at the broken thing before reaching for the phone. That is the whole list. Every repair, from number 20 all the way down to number 2, began with the very same act. A man walked over to the broken thing. He crouched down beside it if he had to. He looked at it closely. He touched it, moved the parts with his fingers, and found what was loose, what was worn smooth, what had shifted out of true. And most of the time, what he found was small. A loose screw, a dried-out seal, a gap that simply wanted filling. The fix itself took less time than finding the right phone number would have taken, but it asked one thing that no service contract on earth can replace: the plain belief that he was capable of understanding what had gone wrong. Your grandfather carried that belief as his default setting, his whole life. Not because some board had certified him, because he had looked at broken things through the leanest years this country ever lived. He fixed them with his own 2 hands, and the doing of it over and over had made him certain. That certainty is still here. It is still available to you. It cannot be bought at any price. It can only be built, one repair at a time. Start looking. None of these 20 repairs required a license. None required a power tool, a weekend course, or a single soul's permission. They required a man who paid attention to his own house, who heard the squeak and traced it back to the board, who felt the wobble and found its source in the joint, who saw the first slow drip and did not wait for it to become a flood in the floor below. That attention was once the quiet center of American fatherhood. Not wealth, not ambition, the plain, unglamorous ability to look at something broken and know, without asking another living soul, that your own hands could set it right. We did not lose the tools. They are still out there in the garage, in the can, in the drawer. We lost the confidence that reaches for them without first stopping to wonder whether we are even allowed to try. And we lost the voice that once stood beside a 10-year-old boy at a cluttered workbench, patient, certain, calloused from 40 hard years of honest work, and said, "Watch me. I will show you this one time, then you will know it for the rest of your life." That is what these 20 repairs truly were. Not a list of chores, a vocabulary. And the men who spoke it fluently, through the hardest decade this country has ever faced, could walk into any broken room in America and make it whole again.